right. Hi. My name is Councillor Woodward, and I'm acting mayor today as the mayor is busy doing another item. So I'm going to call to order, and I'm going to do the land acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is a traditional territory of the Ktunaxa, the Syilx, and Sinixt people, and is home to the Métis and many other diverse Aboriginal persons. We honor their connection to the land and river and respect the importance of the environment to our strength as a community. So I'd like to, any introduction of any late items? Seeing none, I'm going to move on. I need an adoption of the agenda. Moved by Councillor Tate, seconded by Councillor Payne. All those in favor? And that passes. And I need the adoption of minutes of previous meeting. Moved by Councillor Page, seconded by Councillor Payne.
I have a question.
Yes.
I mean, I have there was a change that I noticed in one of them.
Right.
Is that, I'm sorry. I think in the third one on the list, one of the people that spoke, her name was just misspelled. Is that important to have there?
Yeah, let me know what it is.
Salida, and her last name is Work. I don't think you had there. So you have S-E and it's S-O-L-I-T-A. So 90% right, and her last name is Work.
Okay.
That was it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Payne. Okay, so we had a mover and a seconder. All those in favor? And that passes. And so then we're going to do a resolution to close the meeting to the public. It is the opinion of council that public interest requires that persons other than members of council and staff at any other approved audience be excluded from the meeting, and that the meeting of council continues under section 901A on matters regarding the acquisition, disposition, or expropriation of land or improvements. So I need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Page, Councillor Tate, all those in favor? And that.
That's LP. And Q.
All right. We've fixed our technical issue, and so we're going to move the meeting forward. I'm Councillor Woodward. I'm sitting in for Mayor Morrison as she is away, although she is on screen listening in. There she is. Hello, Mayor Morrison. So I'll be acting mayor tonight. So we are going to go ahead and start the meeting. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is the land acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is traditional territory of the Ktunaxa, the Syilx, and the Sinixt people, and is home to Métis and many other diverse Aboriginal persons. We honor their connection to the land and rivers and respect the importance of the environment to our strength as a community. Council, any introduction of late items? Okay, seeing none, moving forward. We need an adoption of the agenda as is. Councillor Tate and Councillor Page. All those in favor? And that passes.
Be careful with how high you put that.
We will moving on to 5, which is the adoption of minutes from previous meetings. Could I have a mover and a seconder?
We did that.
We did that already? Yes? Okay, that was done? Okay, so we're going to move right into number 11, which is public participation. Is there any public participation that would like to come to the microphone? Can I have any hands? Show of hands? 1, 2, 3. Okay. So in that case, I am going to read the rules. So this is public participation at Committee of the Whole meetings of Council. Council welcomes comments from the public on issues it is dealing with or issues of interest to the public. Before speaking, please state your name and area of residence, either city or RGCK. Comments from the public will be limited to a maximum of 3 minutes. 3 minutes each, with a 15 minutes total, yes. This is not the forum for complaints, which are dealt with by staff through the established complaint procedures. Council will not make any decisions at this meeting about the matter you raise, but may refer the matter to staff for follow-up. Speakers must not address topics that relate to matters for which public hearings must be held prior to council's consideration of the matter or adoption of bylaw. Speakers shall address all comments through the mayor or presiding member. Please avoid clapping or displaying any emotional response, as such actions will not be permitted. Maintaining a composed demeanor ensures that all opinions shared can be heard in a setting that is unbiased as possible. So, who will be the first speaker? Mr. John Alton, come on up. So you have 3 minutes. I'll just put a timer on, John.
He needs his microphone on, doesn't he, Jessica?
Yes, you need to sit down, and you just sit down, John, if you'd like. Yeah, it makes it easier if you sit down for the cameras.
Just make sure that the lock button is pushed and there should be a blue light at the base. Lock? Yeah, and just push it down.
Oh, that.
Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
Test. 1, 2, 3.
Okay, so,
On.
John, I'm going to press start, and you have 3 minutes.
Okay.
Remember to announce who you are.
Yeah, I'm John Alton. I live in Uphill. I've been living in Nelson for 28 years. And I went to the presentation on Sioux Big Oil at the regional district, and I was really impressed and convinced that that's the way to go. And I think that we should let the courts decide if the Big Oil has responsibility to us, which I believe they do. So I would really just ask for you to vote yes for Sioux Big Oil.
Okay.
Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to mention that I'm really bothered that the province has pushed us into this lot coverage of 4 units for all over the low-density residential. I'm against that, and I think the city had it right when they just like, okay, you put in a suite and you can put a laneway house in. That's great. That's all we need. And this 2 duplexes on a lot in the low-density areas, which I live in, that wasn't the deal I signed up for. And I don't want the densification. And to me, it's not going to solve the housing crisis to build market housing, more market housing, and densify really beautiful neighborhoods with trees and green space. So, yeah. And so my ask would be, maybe at the BCUM, you guys go back off.
Okay.
Yeah, stop messing in. That's municipal business. It's not the province to stick their nose in there.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's it.
Thank you, John. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Okay. I think the lady in the green hat. If you just come up and state your name and where you live and move forward then.
Hello, everybody. My name is Cassandra, and I live in the city of Nelson. I've written something out because I'm a little nervous. I've never done anything like this before. So I hope you guys... Thanks. I hope you don't mind if I read. Let me just grab it here. All right. I, along with many other community members, am disappointed by the recent destruction of the Hendrick Street Park. The lack of transparency and public consultation was very disappointing. To me, it appears to be a direct attack on the most vulnerable people in our community. However, I'm hopeful that something beautiful can be created in its place, something that can truly be shared by all. I propose the building of a community food garden where people from all walks of life and socioeconomic backgrounds can come together and connect with the land and each other. Studies show that community gardens lead to improved health and wellness physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. They have also been shown to increase food security, as well as lead to a reduction in substance use. But perhaps most importantly, they promote community and belonging. I am greatly inspired by Jonathan Allen and the work he's doing with Brandy's Place. He is helping combat and break down the stigma, marginalization, and discrimination that people experiencing homelessness face by giving them a safe place to be and providing them with meaningful opportunities to give back to their community. I envision a space where the housed and unhoused can work and learn alongside each other, where we can unite as one people. I have experience working on organic farms and gardens and would love to help get this project off the ground. With city's approval, I would reach out to nonprofits, secure funding, and assemble a passionate team of volunteers to help make this dream a reality. I envision the placement of terraced raised beds, perhaps even a greenhouse, growing healthy organic foods such as tomatoes, beans, peas, squash, greens, carrots, beets, and all manner of herbs and spices. There could even be a composting system, perhaps vermiculture, with worm composting, and we could hold educational sessions and demonstrations. With the right funding, there could be a paid position created for someone in need who would keep the park clean, tidy, and litter-free. My hope is that you sincerely consider this proposal. I think this idea could help build resiliency in this area of climate change by strengthening our local food system and by strengthening our social bonds in the way we show up for one another. Whether or not the Hendricks lot turns out to be a suitable location, my hope is to see some kind of community initiative like this arise that engages both the housed and unhoused populations in order to bring about compassionate, transformative change in our beautiful community. No matter how the city, actually, I'm just going to leave it there, sorry.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
Thank you.
Yay.
And the third, I think it was Amy. Come on up.
Good evening, Council.
You could
Mayor
just,
Morrison, if you're watching.
could you just sit down and,
I'd like to do that, but I'd like to ask you to accommodate my disability because also I was trained in the city of Vancouver to stand when speaking. And so that's my background. And you questioned my background the last time I was here. So I'm letting you know. I come from a background of standing.
okay, as long as
And
is the mic on?
And sometimes I've heard people speaking from here. Somebody spoke about Palestine, Marianne Morris, and she was in the audience. And what I find when I'm listening to council is they're not doing what they ask us to do. I can hardly understand what you're saying sometimes. Thank you. I've also had a feedback from the radio, and I had no idea that these words that were flying out of my mouth were being recorded, that they couldn't hear me. So I have more energy when I'm standing. Thank you for accommodating this. I didn't know why I was coming, but I have some background in community engagement and healthy neighborhoods in Vancouver, and community gardens were part of it. And I was very amazed that when all those trees were taken down at what we call the Hendricks Park, was because they were an invasive species. And the invasive species is because they are Norwegian pines. And in Vancouver, at the cemetery, the Department of Defense of Canada paid good money, $1,000 a tree, to buy these kind of trees because they were like standing soldiers. They put them in a line. So I was perplexed by this. I don't have a background in trees, plants, gardening, but it was mystifying for me. And I do recall a wonderful community garden that was in support of the hospice, and it was very functional, and it evaporated. So I also put in my time to promote seeds, the greenhouse. I remember the mayor at the time saying, this is a political statement, that he'd like every senior's residence to have one. So that could be interpreted as every major senior's place, long-term care, assisted living, or you could think it means every household that has a senior. Anyway, that also got shortchanged with various situations that occurred with climate change. Trees falling on the beautiful glass greenhouse that was there, and the one that replaced it was not actually functional. It had a concrete floor, it had wood containers that had some kind of treatment in them for wood that meant that they couldn't be growing organic food in it. Other things between designating something to be done and actually who actually gets to do the work and information that's needed for supporting community engagement there. I am in the Bogastown district
Sorry.
of Nelson.
Mimi, that's
Thank
so
you.
that's 3 minutes and 10 seconds. So
That's wonderful.
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Mimi's chair.
Thank you very much to the gallery. So we'll be moving on to the next section of the meeting, which is delegations. And tonight we are looking at a draft of the official community plan. So I will just read the analysis of the summary. Natalie Anterjancic, Director of Development Services, along with City Planners Alex Thum, who is on the computer screen, and Ken Bordeaux. Is that right? Bordeaux? Bordeaux. Will present the first draft of the updated 2025 Official Community Plan, OCP. This presentation will highlight key policy changes and additions, followed by an opportunity for council to discuss the proposed draft, ask questions of staff, and provide any further direction to staff as required. So I will hand it over to our two guests.
Good evening, Council. So tonight, Ken, Alex, and myself are going to present a high-level overview of the draft official community plan, focusing on major policy changes. If at all possible, I'd ask that you refrain from asking questions during the presentation, and we're happy to answer those at the end if possible. So just as a quick refresher, the official community plan, or OCP, is our highest level planning document. It shapes how our neighborhoods grow and change, how we move around, our land uses, and our amenities. However, not everything in the official community plan will be actioned, but all of Council's decisions should be consistent with the OCP. Finally, the OCP is a living document and will be amended from time to time after it is updated or after it is adopted. It will be updated or changed based on direction from council, recommendations from staff, or through rezoning applications. In terms of the project timeline, this process started in March of 2023 and has included 2 rounds of public engagement. The first in the summer of 2023 to help define the community's vision and also develop the 4 foundational values. The second in the spring of 2024 provided direction on policy intentions for the OCP update. Also, a community advisory committee has played a really important role, acting as our sounding board to the community. That includes 12 members of the public, 2 council members, and the mayor as the chair. So in terms of next steps, tomorrow the draft OCP will be released to the public and we'll launch the final round of engagement. It's a really important phase to confirm that we've captured the community's vision for the City of Nelson and to check that we've got it right. The presentation looks a bit different.
So we had some technical issues. Alex is sharing this.
Okay.
So does Alex need to move it forward?
Okay, maybe, Alex, I'll just tell you when I want to go to the next slide. The slide you currently have works. Okay. So the purpose of today's presentation is to present a high-level changes of the OCP, both for council and the community, address any questions that council may have about the draft document, and then seek direction from council on any changes you'd like to see. Next slide, please, Alex. In terms of our project goals that were presented to council when we started this project, was to reflect and adapt to changes since 2013 when the current OCP was adopted. A lot has changed in the last decade. Reconnect with the community. So this is an opportunity to both inform the public about what the official community plan is, why it's important, and why they should be involved in updating it. Update the vision for our community and identify any potential gaps as well as future aspirations. You know, what do we want to become as a city? Next slide, please, Alex. For our policy drafting criteria, we really wanted to do an update, a holistic update of this document. What has changed in Nelson in the past 10 years and what was not considered in 2013. What plans and policies have been developed since our last OCP was updated, and what of those policies need to be incorporated in this policy document. What are the best practices from other municipalities across BC? We reviewed 10 other OCPs that were recently adopted. And then also, this is a legislative document and has requirements from the Local Government Act that we needed to embed in this policy document. We've also aligned the draft with the new vision, the values, and the principles. We've also connected each policy to an objective, which is different from the current OCP. We've aligned with how other cities have structured and written their OCPs and design guidelines. We've tried to have more concise writing, removed redundancies, and condensed policies wherever possible. And we've removed a bunch of explanatory text from the document to try and keep it a bit more simple, all in the hopes to make it a bit more easy to read, use, and interpret. I'm going to hand it over to Alex to talk about some of the bigger changes.
Thank you, Natalie. So I'll go over the 5 major structural changes to the OCP. So number 1, the introductory chapter has changed quite a bit in order to give more information to the community, to the public about what an OCP is, what it isn't, what local government's role is, and what it isn't, and also to expand on the explanatory section, but on the community's history, First Nations history of the area as well too, and information on what Nelson has been and what it is today in terms of demographics and population. And as well as some information on this process that we've been going through for the past 2 years, on the public engagement, what we've heard, and various phases of developing OCPS information. A bit more detailed information than we have in the current OCP, but in order to keep a transparent document and to make it clear when people take a look at this thing several years down the road, have an understanding of where it comes from. Secondly, as Natalie said, with vis-a-vis the objectives in how the OCP was drafted, the idea was to really rewrite a lot of the OCP without necessarily changing it. So that's, I think, an important bit to highlight, is that when you take the 2 documents, the 2013 OCP and this draft OCP, you put them side by side, they look quite a bit different. But it's a lot of it is in the writing, and it's not necessarily in the content per se. As Natalie said, a lot of the policies have been synthesized, so amalgamated to be more concise, save space, and be clear, frankly, and which makes it, sort of shows the coherence of the document a bit better as well too. So the strategic goals as well too of this draft OCP has changed, of course. As you know, there's a new vision and values and principles that were developed. So the OCP is also, the policies and objectives have also been rethought in order to align with those updated strategic pieces of the puzzle. So on paper, they look quite a bit different, but when you actually look at the policies and you analyze them side by side, there's not a ton of changes. We're going to be going over quite a few of these throughout the presentation. But again, just to emphasize that we're talking about an update to the OCP here. Thirdly, the land use analysis section has been updated. There's quite a bit of information both on residential land use, our zoned capacity, on the commercial industrial side as well too, updated analysis on employment trends and commercial trends as well too, that impact land use in our city. And the key findings of the housing needs report have been integrated as well too, in certain bits of analysis as required by the Local Government Act. So as you know, the housing needs report wasn't an optional process, it was a mandatory process, and we're also required to integrate that into the OCP and to ensure that our housing policies and subsequently zoning, which we'll look at down the road and talk about that later, align with our 20-year housing needs projections. Fourth, also in the land use section of the OCP, the land use designations chart has been streamlined and redesigned. So this is kind of independently of the map. So there's the land use designation map, which still shows the neighborhoods going from Rosemount to through to Uphill and Gyro and to Fairview. There's still residential. Downtown is still mixed use commercial residential. But the chart in the OCP has been rethought to provide a more high level approach instead of having it read a bit more like a zoning bylaw, which the 2013 OCP does, really listing every single sort of form of building and a type of business that might be allowed in each of the land use designations. Through best practice research, we've adopted a more high level approach, saying low density residential neighborhoods. We allow residential forms of housing that are compatible, small scale residential forms of housing. The zoning bylaw is where you'll find that detailed list of exactly what types of structures are allowed. And similarly, also following best practices on how OCPs can be written, we've introduced a new column in that chart as well, too, defining so maximum building height is expressed in stories rather than meters. So this is also a point where it's important to understand the difference between the OCP and the zoning bylaw. And then when we're really looking at building permit applications, we're looking at the zoning bylaw. The OCP matters as well too, but the OCP is what's directing us when we're writing and amending the zoning bylaw, as well as considering any amendments or variances to the zoning bylaw. So as it's stated at the beginning or just above that chart, there can be exceptions made to the maximum number of stories that are included in that chart for projects that have a particular value to the community, including affordable housing. But it's a guideline. The maximum number of stories is a guideline. It's a general rule for each of those land use designation areas. So fifth, finally on this slide, the introduction of a new tool, development approval information. It's something that the Local Government Act allows us to do. It allows the city to request a very wide range of studies and reports from developers when they're making applications for either a development permit, a zoning amendment, or a temporary use permit. And the purpose of this is to ensure that those proposals, either amendments, GUPs rather, or DPs, align with the strategic directions that the city has, and most notably those in the OCP. So you'll see if you take a look at the development approval information section of the OCP, there's not a ton of information on it. So it's supposed to be, it's normal because when we come forward with an actual amending bylaw to adopt the new OCP, at that point we'll have to adopt another bylaw as well too, where all of the details of that development approval information process is explained. So this is the OCP sort of, as dictated by the Local Government Act, kind of has to set the stage for and introduce the notion and allow for development approval information, but it's still pretty high level at this point. So more information to come on that. The last thing I'll talk about before passing it on to Ken and going through each of the policy sections, one major change here is around what we're doing with development permits and development permit design guidelines. So firstly, separating out what's currently the development permit area 3, which includes sort of all mishmashed together, wildfire zone, riparian zone, flood hazard zone. It's a little bit confusing to have all of the natural hazard zones under one, label in the same zone. So we're separating those out to be clearer for everyone, including in-house as well. Secondly, this is both a big one, but we don't want to exaggerate the change this means either around the new heritage conservation area. So currently, we do have quite a bit of design guidelines and have had for decades now for buildings, whether they have a heritage status or not. that are on Baker Street. And those are currently just contained in the downtown design guidelines. So someone who has a building on Baker Street, old, new, whatever, they come for a development permit, and the development permit guidelines say, well, on Baker Street, there's this additional set of heritage-specific guidelines that apply. So what we're proposing to do now is to take those out, extract those from the development permit process, and put them into the tool that the provincial government wants us to be using for regulating heritage, which is the heritage conservation area. That's a tool that's designed to do this kind of thing. So it's the same parameters. We're talking about any building that has frontage on Baker Street. So the applicable area, coverage area isn't changing at all. Let's say in the next point, the design guidelines are changing, but the fact that we're switching tools at this point in time doesn't have or won't have a major impact on property owners or development rights. The main difference is that instead of issuing a development permit, we'd be issuing a heritage alteration permit, the terminology used in the Local Government Act. What this does, though, by making this change now, is it sort of sets us up to start getting ourselves familiar with the Heritage Conservation Area tool. It's something that the Heritage Plan talks a lot about, not just for downtown, but potentially one day elsewhere in the city as well. So it's a good first step. It's a tool that's more powerful than development permits, but we're not proposing to make use of all of those powers at this point. We might get there one day, but incremental change. So, for example, single-family homes here on Baker Street still wouldn't be subject, as is currently the case, to stricter heritage rules. Thirdly, the design guidelines have, except for the Wildfire and Laneway House development permit areas, have been completely redone. Those are most visible for the heritage guidelines that will be applicable to Baker Street, as well as the citywide general multi-unit residential, commercial, and industrial guidelines, ones that apply for basically any larger building, residential or commercial alike, across the city. They're much shorter, they're much more concise, and more high level, and allow for more flexibility as well too, and more innovation from architects and developers by being less prescriptive and being more objective based, more performance based. We're saying what we want to see, and there's a few exceptions, but generally we just say what we want to see, what we want to achieve, and there's flexibility for how the architect is going to get there. It's also provides more clarity on how to interpret and use those rules by sort of bringing some clarification around whether something should be done, what our expectations are, and what must be done as well too, which is something that's been missing in recent years from the design guidelines. And lastly, we're proposing as well too to no longer require development permits for 3 and 4 unit residential buildings. So triplexes, fourplexes, for example, increasing that cutoff to 5. So starting at 5 residential units, a development permit would be required. So this sort of aligns with the Bill 44 density increase brought about last year, that now 3 to 4 units are allowed citywide. So they wouldn't be, now that basically any lot is allowed to have that level of density, it would be a lot of administrative burden to issue development permits for all of those as well too. It's also best practice in order to help alleviate the housing crisis by reducing the red tape for these smaller projects. I'll pass it on to Ken.
Thank you, Alex. So, as mentioned previously, the bulk of the OCP is policies to enable council the ability to make decisions in the future. So I'm just going to talk at a very sort of high level around general land use policies across the city, and then I'll get into some specific areas like housing and culture and parks and recreation. So, thank you. So one of the sort of bigger ideas that we've introduced to this OCP is the idea of neighborhood hubs, which are areas where we could potentially introduce small-scale commercial uses within existing neighborhoods to enable neighborhood residents to access basic services such as a coffee shop or a doctor's office close to their home, so they don't necessarily have to get in their car or get on the bus every time they want to access basic services. Within the OCP, there are 5 neighborhood hubs that have been identified, primarily in areas where there's existing small-scale commercial. So, for example, LNC Bakery and Uphill Market are just sort of 2 examples. As well, we've introduced the concept of a neighborhood center, and this is an area in Upper Fairview where additional work would be needed to determine what would be best in that area. So we are working currently on the map for both the neighborhood hubs and the neighborhood centers, and we're hoping to release that to council and to the public soon. Generally, the neighborhood center area is the Selkirk College lands, sort of up 10th Street and Fell Street area. And as I had mentioned, we do our best to come to council and the public with a complete OCP, but in some cases, additional study is required, and in this particular case, staff would be recommending this policy around additional work needing to be done in that particular area. As well, there's various different policies around heritage and the promotion of heritage and the renovation and addition of existing buildings. So there's a wide variety of policies around potentially providing financial incentives or using various different tools allowed by various different municipal legislation, including things like heritage revitalization agreements. As well, we've also introduced policy around potentially permitting additional uses in institutional areas. So, for example, residential on college lands or church lands or something along those lines. As well as Alex had mentioned previously, we've other than the actual land use, the other defining feature of each land use district or area is a maximum building stories, rather than what has previously been done in OCPs is looking at things like maximum units per hectare or floor space ratio. So generally within the planning industry, if you could call it that, is previously there was many restrictions sort of pulled on top of development. So in this case, we're simply using the idea of maximum building stories for each land use designation. As well, there's a number of policies that are in there to enable our Housing Accelerator Fund application. And I just learned this week that the City of Delta received their Housing Accelerator Fund monies. So I'm confident that the federal government is going to be announcing something soon. We haven't heard ourselves, but the City of Delta got their money on Monday, yesterday I guess it is. So hopefully we're the next one. The next section is around reconciliation. So I think, as we all know, that is a brand new area of policy for the city. And in that section, there's a number of different policies around relationship building and potentially entering into agreements and memorandums of understanding with our local First Nations, as well as potentially working with them on various different economic development opportunities. On the housing section, this is probably the section that has changed the most out of all of the sections. So as Alex had mentioned previously, we've made a number of different updates related to the small-scale multi-unit housing legislation and the requirement now to write a housing needs report and have that considered alongside a new official community plan. More specifically with the policies, there's policies in there around the city potentially exploring requiring accessible universal design for new multifamily residential development. As well as potentially considering a new family-friendly housing policy, which would mandate a minimum number of 2 and 3, potentially 4-bedroom units within new multifamily residential development. On the climate resilience section, in this particular instance, we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. We have Nelson Next, the city's climate action plan, and all we've simply done with the OCP is embed that document within the OCP. So you'll see a policy that specifically says the city's climate action plan and climate targets are in Nelson Next, and you should refer to that document. In the economy section, it's also a new section. Previously, there was very little mention of the economy and how the city could work to improve the economy in the greater Nelson area. And the primary focus with the policies in this section is a low carbon economy, affordability, as well as what I had mentioned before, potentially partnering with local indigenous nations on potential economic development opportunities. In the arts, culture, and heritage section, there is not as many changes as the other sections. However, we have focused the policies here around public and outdoor arts and culture. As well, we've also wanted to add specifically the topic of arts and heritage. As you can see, previously that section was simply just called culture. So we wanted to have some more emphasis on those other 2 topics. And we also wanted to embed the existing heritage plan within the OCP. So very similar to what we've done with Nelson Next, we want to refer people to the heritage plan if they want more details on what the city's position is when it comes to preserving heritage. So in the infrastructure, parks, recreation, and public spaces section, previously called Parks and Recreation, similar to the previous section where we wanted to expand what we were discussing. So we've added the idea of public spaces more specifically, rather than just specifically talking about parks, because we have our streets, we have public squares, we have the promenade along the water, so we wanted to sort of expand on that. As well, just like with a number of other things I've mentioned, we also wanted to embed the downtown urban design strategy within the OCP. So if there are any questions around what our public spaces should look like in the downtown, we would refer people to the downtown urban design strategy. As well, we also wanted to put specifically in the OCP the city's position around ensuring that all spaces are universally accessible, safe, and all season. As well, we also wanted to make it clear that the position is that when we are building new infrastructure, for example, rebuilding Baker Street, we want to make sure that there's amenities like washrooms, water fountains, and weather protection throughout the city. On the topic of infrastructure, in this particular section, there's a number of policies around potentially exploring things like development cost charges and amenity cost charges to help pay for any future infrastructure that the city may need. As well, there's a policy in here around confirming the city's going to continue with its master plan, either master plan creation or updates, and kind of going back to the ACC, DCC, kind of linking the two. We're going to create these plans, and then how are we going to pay for that? In the transportation section, there's quite a few policies around focusing on multimodal transportation. So instead of exclusively focusing on, for the most part, transit and cars in the current OCP. We want to talk about policies around all forms of transportation. As well, there's three, pardon me, I guess you could say 2 or 3 minor changes to the map. So we've added a number of collector road designations on the map, and that includes Cottonwood Street, Stanley Street, as well as West Richards and West Innes Street on the Rosemont Loop. As well, one downgrading of a street, Lakeside Drive between Hall Street and the mall. And on to our next section. So it's a bit of a mouthful, but it's natural environment, wildfire protection, and community safety, formerly known as natural environment and hazardous conditions. Just like I'd mentioned with a number of other different documents, we wanted to embed the community wildfire resilience plan within the OCP. And, at this point, you might be seeing a theme here. We want to make sure that when people are looking at the OCP, that's properly referencing all of these other documents that we have as well. There's also policy in the OCP as well at looking at opportunities for increasing natural habitat, protecting ecosystems, and potentially implementing winter city strategies. As well, there's policies around continuing to implement things like Bear Smart measures. And lastly, in this section, we haven't made any change, but we have put some policy and some wording around potentially exploring expanding the riparian area development permit area from 15 meters to 30 meters from the high water mark of Kootenay Lake. So what that would mean potentially is anyone who is wanting to develop along the lake, if they're currently within 15 meters of the high water mark, they are required to undertake a number of different studies to see if the development would be would have a negative effect on the lake. In this particular case, we may look at potentially expanding that to 30 meters. On to community health and well-being, formerly known as healthy living and social well-being. There's a whole variety of different policies in there related around focusing on equity and inclusion, homelessness, food security, public safety, and accessibility. So on that note, I'll pass it back to Alex to talk about implementation and monitoring, as well as next steps.
All right, thank you, Ken. So this chapter of the OCP, so what do we do with all of those policies that we just discussed? And of course, as said previously, Ken was just highlighting some of the major changes, and not all. There's a lot more policies than that in the OCP because there's a lot of good content that we've carried over as well from the 2013 OCP. So with this chapter. Yeah, what are we going to do with all of this? How are we going to make some, as much progress as we can? Will be realistic, and what are our targets? So the policies, the section saying that. Well, first of all, our key success target would be carbon neutrality by 2050. This aligns with a lot of our other previous work in the past 5 years or so on climate, including the West Kootenay 100% renewable target, as well as Nelson Next, of course. So really, there's that climate focus front and center. But there's more to that as well. More to the OCP than climate policy. There's a lot more in here. So there's some direction as well too for staff on how to proceed with implementation. We won't get to the details here, but it's not too long of a read. It's about 1 page of text in the OCP. So I'll let you take a look at that. But it takes an adaptive implementation approach. So instead of embedding an implementation schedule right now where we're committing to, well, in 2028, we're going to do this no matter what. In 2029, we're going to do that no matter what. And if we wanted to change that, well, we'd have to actually amend the bylaw. We're taking an approach to say, well, every year, reality changes, priorities change, emergencies happen, emergency projects. But every year, we're going to take a look and have a target on the number of OCP policies that we want to make progress on. Finally, a progress report every 5 years. So the Local Government Act now requires us to update the OCP every 5 years. So it only seems natural as well to to focus our progress reports at that same interval as well too. Some places, perhaps places with more staff, have more of an annual or biannual approach, but of course we have to recognize that takes a lot of time as well to be reporting. We want to also keep some time for doing. On the targets front, there are 16 fairly ambitious targets. In here, the climate targets are the same as in Nelson Next. Council has already seen those. For the other policy areas, they're targets that are easily measurable, oftentimes using Statistics Canada data or other readily available data that we don't have to, pay $20,000 to commission a study in order to verify whether we're meeting our targets and keeping pace with what we said we can do. We're able to get that information generally for free online. Anyone can do it. So easily measurable targets definitely make I think everyone's life a bit easier. So next steps, first step is we're here today. So this is our main opportunity to have a discussion with you, Mayor and Council, and to receive your feedback on this draft OCP. Presumably the next time that we're going to be coming back to Council on the OCP will be with a second draft that we'll be presenting for first and second reading. So as a reminder, for the public, what that means is, yes, it'll be coming forward as a bylaw amendment, but there's still possibility to make changes both from council as well as a public hearing that has to follow as well too before we get adopted. But to really address council members, that's the next time that we're planning on coming back to you would be for first and second reading. So this is really an important discussion to be had today. Starting tomorrow, we're going to be going online with our new round of public engagement. This includes surveys, an open house as well too will be held. Date hasn't yet been announced, but that'll happen sometime in February. But we have a new public engagement platform that's going online. It's pretty intuitive, pretty clear. We're excited to be going forward with that. So it'll be open for a few weeks. After that, we're going to be taking all that information, taking what we hear from you today, taking the public engagement information as well too. As a reminder, our strategy was attached to this report as well too. We don't have a slide on it today in order to really focus on policy, but we provided that information as to what we're going to be doing over the coming 3 weeks. So we're going to take all of that and start preparing a second draft based on what we heard. And depending on how much we've heard, it's hard to, we don't know how long that's going to take, of course, but ideally it would be wonderful if we could return to you for a first and second reading, the second draft as early as April, but we'll see how long it takes to process all that information. That is it.
All right. Thank you very much, Alex, Ken, and Natalie. So I guess it'd be questions here. So council, do you have any questions for the presenters? Councillor Payne.
I do indeed. Thank you so much. Some really, I'll try and maybe speak louder. Is that going to be better? Some really thoughtful work has gone into this. As a member of the OCP Advisory Committee, I'm inspired by how you took all the input that you received and managed to streamline it into what I think is a very approachable document. So thank you very much. And we saw it without all the graphics and all the beautiful things that I think will make it much more approachable for everyone in the city to read. Great information in there. My first question, and this is my first participation in an OCP, so tell me if I'm off track, but when I read that the primary indicator of the OCP's success is carbon neutrality by 2050, I am not feeling tremendously engaged by that, because I'm feeling that the primary indicator of success should have more to do with the residents and who live in our community. So I'm not sure, no one would ever think that I wasn't interested in carbon neutrality by 2050. I'm solidly there for that. But is there a reason why we're not more resident focused in that indicator of success? And I know that as you go down through the 16 ambitious targets, a lot of the things are included there, but it's just that overarching. So I don't know if you want to, the CAO has a somewhat perplexed look on his face, so maybe I am not on target with this.
I think you're right on target. It's,
Okay.
The OCP has many goals that we're trying to build out. And I agree it should be reflected in.
I want people to feel engaged and enlivened by this document. I want them to feel that this is something that I am invested in and moving forward with. So that would be the only thing. I don't know if you need a marketing company. I think you did amazing work on many of the ways you've expressed that, but that would be the thing that jumped out at me. You're the professionals.
It is a draft.
Yeah, it is a draft, and I think that's why we're here today. So that was the first thing that hit me. I have a few others, but I will defer to my colleagues.
Okay. Did you want to respond to that, Natalie?
I feel like we've lost Alex.
I feel like we've lost Alex, potentially.
No, I'm here.
Oh, you're here, Alex. Do you want to answer this question?
No, I think it's an interesting comment, Councillor Payne. I don't have a reason as to why it is what it isn't. But if you had, I guess, examples of how you would, either now today or in writing, later in the coming weeks, I think I'd be really interested in hearing some of your ideas as to what that would look like. Concretely, how you'd want to either remove that policy or change it, replace it completely. But I'm intrigued. But I don't have a more explanation other than that. It is what it is. You're right that the focus is really on that, and it's being placed on that rather than on residents and resident engagement. But that's something that could change.
Yeah, and I think staff can take that away. I think we hear your point, and we can look at drafting something more holistic, I guess, is probably the best word.
And I'm sure the OCP committee might have some contribution to this as well.
Yeah, not lose that concept, but it's obviously an important one, but it's one of a number of concepts.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Lottenberg.
I'm going to disagree.
Okay.
First, there's some misalignment between the carbon neutrality by 2050 and the actual carbon neutrality date of 2040. So it's actually 75% reduction by 2030 and then carbon neutrality by 2040. 100% renewable Kootenays, which predates Nelson Next, had that 2050 date, but we updated it to specifically align with IPCC recommendations to hold global warming below 1.5 degrees. So we just said, what does the science say? Well, let's do that, because our responsibility is so much greater than, say, the global south. So if we're talking about equity, this is the minimum we can do. It's the floor, not the ceiling. So I would just add that. So if you're going to play around with the targets on that one specific metric, I don't know how you would.
What I heard was, not the metric, but how we frame the larger goals of the OCP, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not to change, those metrics would still be there, but how do we frame it? This is, we're trying to achieve multiple things here.
Right.
Right.
But to be clear, those targets were passed by council, and so it would take an active council to vote to undo them if that was the intent.
Yeah, no, I don't think I don't think the intent, I think everyone remembers during Nelson Next, it was identified as these ambitious goals, but that is your ambitious goals, and that
Yeah.
should get reflected, right?
Yeah. Yeah. One of the messaging things that we talked about at the time was, let's just do what the science demands we do, what the international community has agreed needs to be done, what the federal government has agreed, what everybody has agreed to do. We'll just align with that. The fact that they happen to be ambitious is just the reality of the world we're living in. But if we keep, shifting the goals, then we're just basically saying 1.5 degrees is no longer on the table. Let's aim for 2.5, which everybody agrees would be truly devastating. So we should keep that. Having said that, I appreciate the languaging of things to make them more personally relevant to people. Like, what does that mean for me? And I think you've done a really nice job of framing up what the character and the design principles that will come out of those goals. So I think that's well done. I do have a separate question though, and it's related to something that I saw earlier, but I couldn't find it again as I was scanning it this time, which is, in the process, we're going to be doing some neighborhood consultation. Or it said that. It's something about, now that we've got the OCP, now let's really work with each neighborhood to, did I mistake that? It was,
No, we have identified neighborhood nodes, so those wouldn't require more planning. It's to support small scale commercial, like Burrell's or Uphill Market.
Right.
But then there's also a neighborhood center, which would be up by Selkirk and Fairview. And we're just saying, if we want to redevelop in that area, we should do some more neighborhood level planning. That's basically where we're calling to, is the Selkirk lands.
right.
Local area plan.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So what I'm referring to, I hear that, and I think that's wonderful. I think that's exactly the kind of design we want to pursue as a community, is like walkable, livable communities where you can meet your neighbors, connect, and have great neighborhood experiences. But what I'm actually talking about is a bit of the follow-up engagement with the neighborhoods. Like, what does that mean for you? And I apologize again that I'm not finding it, so I might be mistaken, but I do remember in the draft that we received earlier, it said that we're going to, once we pass this, the next step is to reach out to the community, the neighborhoods, and do a further planning. Or am I completely off?
I can't recall. It is a big document. Alex, is there anything that you can recall in there?
Well, yeah, it's not necessarily the next step, but it does say that, yeah, we're going to do further neighborhood planning. So originally, maybe say a year ago or so, we really had the ambition of trying to do some of that now, and include that in the OCP from the get-go, but for many reasons we just weren't able to do that properly. So rather than doing something rushed and improper, we decided to sort of settle for the compromise of saying, well, we still have this ambition, this idea of looking at neighborhood nodes and centers, but that planning will have to happen later. So more public engagement and a separate process at a later date, but there's not a timeline.
Okay, so that's what I'm thinking about. So what I'd love to understand, or at least to communicate out to the public, because even we heard it tonight in our public participation, the community, the neighborhoods, they have a trouble engaging with this OCP process until it becomes really relevant to them in terms of their own neighborhoods. And I think that's not that's not their fault. It's just human nature. And I would love for us to really create a culture where the neighborhoods feel a sense of like purpose and agency in what their neighborhoods become. So I was excited to see that, and I would encourage us to make that a priority after we take these next steps.
Okay, thank you, Councilor.
Can I just clarify that, maybe between the planning staff and yourself? If I correct, there's these node concept that we've identified in a few areas of in a few neighborhoods, and that we're identifying some additional planning work for that. But it's, you know, the OCP principles, what the density looks like, what the form and character looks like, etc. I think we're looking for people to provide that input now, and because once we pass this OCP, that's what will happen. It's not on hold to do these other planning exercises.
Yeah.
So we really want people to engage now, and you know, we certainly have talked about how do we ensure that people in community, in neighborhoods, understand the implications of the OCP and how things will develop out in their neighborhoods, and we get that information now. So if council wants to make any changes to that, we do it as part of this OCP process. I think what I understand is the Selkirk neighborhood has a fairly significant amount of change. We're calling for quite a bit of density up there on the Selkirk College lands. And, you know, in that area in particular, we want to, you know, do some more neighborhood planning because of the extent of that change in that particular neighborhood. But this isn't city-wide, so in Uphill or Rosemont, or, you know, I don't know how, you know, this node concept, how broad that is, that you guys are thinking to do additional planning or consultation around that?
There'll be no additional consultation for neighborhood hubs. It's just sort of, these are the areas where there's existing commercial, small scale commercial. And then we have some other criteria in the OCP, if you're on a corner, if you're near bigger buildings, and if you meet a few of those criterias, then we would recommend to council to support a rezoning application. So it'd still have to go through a rezoning application. The only area where we're calling for more neighborhood level planning is the Selkirk lands. Yeah, and as the city has developed, we have done neighborhood level planning. We've done the downtown and waterfront plan. We've done the rail town plan. We did, yeah, that's right. Alex kind of reminded me of this. We were looking at, could we do little neighborhood plans for each of our neighborhoods, like for Fairview and Uphill? And I think it was hard to, at the OCP level, really dive into those communities, and there wasn't a ton of differences to be able to embed in the OCP because it's a high-level planning document. So yeah, I think Kevin's right. I think this is really the opportunity for the community to get involved. And you know, if there is a time where more neighborhood level planning is required, we can always do that in the future. But you know, we have a limited amount of staff resources and a busy department. I think this would be a good opportunity for the public to comment and be part of the conversation. So.
Okay, so thank you very much. So I have on my list here, I have Councillor Panero, Councillor Page, and Councillor Tate. So Councillor Panero?
Yeah, just, I don't know, I don't want to beat this to death or anything, but I did kind of agree with Councillor Payne in the sense that it's interesting to have this entire document with tons of stuff, from affordable housing to infrastructure to transit to everything, and then have the only measure of success being that we're carbon neutral by 2050. I think if we are, that's amazing, and a lot of those other infrastructure goals and transit and a lot of them dovetail quite nicely, probably, and contribute to that goal. But if we are carbon neutral in 2050 and nobody can afford to live here, and nobody recognizes the neighborhood they live in, and I don't know that many people will call that a success. Also, if public engagement is what we want, and which is definitely what we want, and that is the next, I mean, there has been a fair amount of public engagement, and we want more. I think identifying that there's multi-facets of this would probably facilitate that engagement a lot, and we'd spend less time explaining to people that actually carbon neutrality is not the only thing in the OCP, because it's clearly not. There's lots of things in the OCP and that contribute to the town that we live in. And from the survey responses that are reading here, like there's on the public's mind, there's a lot of things here. Affordable housing, there's there's climate stuff as well, and I think a lot of they're not unrelated many times, but everything from healthcare to affordable housing, and this is all part of the OCP, right? So it does, I think, help to have those goals, included, not just one thing, because I think that tends to send the wrong, I feel it sends the wrong message, just to how important all those other things are as well, and the measure of success.
Can I just quickly ask for clarity? Because I think I'm missing something. When we say that's the only goal, what am I?
It's just there. It just says it right there. It says the
Indicator of
measure of
success.
success will be.
Where
Yeah, if I could
page?
just
Right,
jump in
Primary
there.
indicator of the OCP's success.
Oh, you're looking at the presentation.
Okay.
Yes,
Alex, did you want to?
Yeah.
OC.
that's what I'm saying.
I was lost.
Yeah,
I
well,
was on
it's-
the
it's
draft
good-
OCP
it's really good
and they're on
feedback.
the presentation.
Oh, okay.
Oh, so we're just talking about the presentation.
No, it's in the
But the
draft.
OCP as
But it
well.
says
It's
it.
not
It's-
something that struck.
It is
me.
also
So
in the.
let's get this back together here. So Alex, you're going to comment on this?
Yeah, well, it's really good feedback to know that it's not as clear as we would have hoped it is. That's an important part of revising a draft. But yeah, it is true in the policy. So we look in that section on implementation monitoring. There's a policy that says that the primary indicator of success is carbon neutrality, but there are 16 targets in total. That were measurable targets as well too, that also include housing and affordability,
And they're in
that
the
cover
document.
a wide range of policy areas in there. So the intent isn't necessarily to have a hierarchy of them, and there certainly isn't a hierarchy amongst
Way
those
down.
16 targets. It's just that the carbon neutrality bit is what's front and center as a policy, but it's not saying it's the only one or it's the most important. It depends on your definition of primary, but maybe that we need to look at that again. But there's a lot more in there for targets and climate.
Okay.
Have those-
No, yeah. So I have Councillor Page, you're next, and then Councillor Tate.
I'll flog this, I guess. Yeah, an A plus to me is 80% or greater. So, primary target is net neutrality by 2040, which is what the target is, and achieving 80% of the targets listed of the 16 targets, Alex. That's what I kind of see within that because they're listed there. So obviously I get the draft part. One thing I did want to kind of pick out on an equity piece is, you can gentrify really a lot and then end up with 5% of your population not in core housing needs. So I would like to kind of have a look at some of those and make sure we're kind of expressing that people through this process have probably communicated the need for mixed income and everybody in our community has a place to belong. And there's lots of ways some of these targets could potentially just be, if you gave AI be carbon neutral by 2050, it might just shut down all the humans and call it a day, right?
There you go. That's what I'm saying.
I just want to make sure we're baking in that well-being, and Leslie got it at the beginning, and I'm sure we can move on to other parts of the document by now.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Page. Councillor Tate?
Thanks so much. This is great work. I have skimmed the old one in different places, so this is really interesting, the format. I really dug into the design intents, so I thought that was really interesting, and the way that you pulled out the words of like must require versus should and we recommend, and if you're not meeting the recommendations, it's probably not going to be a yes. I know it's not a you must, but we really recommend, so you should get on there. So I really liked that. I did see the phrase 10-minute walk somewhere in there, and I might avoid putting any time around how far it is to how long it takes anyone to walk anywhere.
It's the melt your ice cream cone walk.
I would just take any timings about how big a space is based on that out, if that would be one suggestion I have. I love the neighborhood nodes, village centers, neighborhood centers. I could not find map 4.1, and that just could be a draft part, but it refers to map 4.1, and then I got muddled looking for it. So That's probably just me trying to figure it out.
I couldn't find it either.
Okay, good.
Is that the neighborhood node centers
Yeah.
map? I think maybe we have not sent it
It's
to
not
you.
included. She just said earlier
No,
it's not included.
map
Okay.
4.1 is just a neighborhood map. It's
Yeah.
is actually the existing
Oh.
map that's in the 2013 OCP. It's in the PDF that I sent you a few hours ago. That's going to be online shortly. Sorry, it wasn't. You're right. It wasn't in the Word document. But
I got
it's
a little
embedded
lost
there. It's not in the map section. It's right in the land use section.
Yeah.
It's in the PDF.
Sure.
Page 45.
Sorry about that.
But I don't think it shows a hub.
It doesn't show the hubs and
No,
neighborhoods. as
it
far as I
doesn't.
can tell. No problem.
But I get the hubs now.
I
the
get
hubs
the
should be
nodes
in there.
and the centers and the village centers. I love it. I love that there's this notion about like commercial services, and I love that coffee is a core service that everybody needs.
Especially here in our town.
I am curious about also incorporating recreation, and I know there is some talk of being close to parks and green spaces for those neighborhood village centers and such. I think it's important somehow to make sure that's really clear that part of what people do in a neighborhood is recreate and gather. I think that's really important, especially because we do have these really distinct neighborhoods in Nelson, and we can't centralize everything. We can't centralize it, and we don't want to.
We don't want to.
We don't want to centralize everything. Having said that, I might lean into Councillor Leuchtenberg's, the word you used was agency, which I find really interesting, because I think it's important that the people, as an example, that the 21 neighbors around Lions Park don't have more say in what goes in the park than the people who don't live next to Lions Park. Because Lions Park is a community amenity. It's not a I live on West Richard Street amenity. So while we want folks to have agency and love where they live, I think we have to be careful about weighting opinions in a particular way based on geography. It's a whole city approach to recreation, to gathering, to nodes, and so on. So I understand what you're saying, but I would caution language that weights opinions based on geography within the city, because we're all a part of the city. And you may not have noticed, but on page 145, there is bird-friendly design.
Does it name
Coming back, Kate, coming back.
So
right.
that was my quick skim. Okay. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tate. Councillor Payne?
Gosh, we've just been whipping around so much. I'll go to my pink highlighted things and then I'll come back. 5.6, Parks, Recreation, and Public Spaces. Love the way that's expanded to public spaces. I think it's so, it's critical for us as we densify and move forward. Now I remember what I was going to jump back, because the other thing is in Rosemont, I'm thinking that Granite Point will also be a village. Okay, so I just want clarity on that, because I know it's got its own development permit section, but when I see it that way, I do see the Selkirk lands as needing and having all those amenities, as well as Granite Point. Having lived up in Rosemont, I know sometimes it was interesting if you needed an item, how far you needed to go to finish your dinner recipe. So I love that idea. And I will just say, in reading, I have heard that if you don't want to put a time frame around it, it's how far can your child walk home from the node with an ice cream cone before it melts. So I don't know if that's 10 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever it is, but it's another way of thinking about it.
Depends how old they are.
Yeah, I guess. I think it might have actually said like a 10-year-old. But they were trying to get away from putting a number on it, as Councillor Tate suggested. The question I had, though, around the Parks, Recreation, and Public Spaces was, I was looking at what the recommended space per capita is. And I love it when I see numbers about how many hectares each zoning area had, and I didn't add it all up, but I didn't see a number for parks there. Is that one readily available?
I don't see that one either, actually.
Yeah, I can.
Because when we
speak
talk
to
about
that.
recreation, I think that's an important piece.
Yeah, I can speak to that. So that information, it's true, it's not in the OCP itself. However, it is online.
Okay.
It is in the Parks and Recreation one-pager that was published earlier.
I knew I'd seen it. Thank you.
Say in the summer or something last year.
Yep.
It's on the Nelson2050.ca website, and in short, we have 61 hectares, 5.49 hectares per 1,000 residents, which surpasses
The recommendation of 2 to 4 per.
the recommendation, by quite a bit. Yeah.
So we can significantly increase our density and still come within a very healthy ratio of parks per capita. Well, that's a good feeling. Thank you. I did get the one pager. I knew I'd seen it somewhere, but yeah, there's a lot of information here. I know you guys are living and breathing it. Yeah, so that was my question. I also wanted to comment that I love the Winter City concept. I went and looked at their website, and it was interesting to, have a frame there as we have people moving here from other places, that's what we are. We're a winter city. Embrace it.
Thank you, Councillor Payne. Councillor Luckenberg?
Thank you. So apologies, I did end up finding in policies on page 112, the primary indicator. It does seem rather arbitrary, so I agree that it just pulled. But it seems overall the intent in terms of targets and everything else does make sense. You've got a broad range of targets without prioritizing any one over the other. Having said that, there's a couple of things I want to respond to. Something that Councillor Tate said that I think is important, and I thought you were on the right track when you talked about neighborhood engagement, which was, yes, some of these are citywide amenities, but when we ask people to shovel the walk in front of their residents, or care for their neighbors or something, what we're trying to build is kind of a sense of agency or connection to your ownership, I guess, to your neighborhood. And I think that's something I feel like we've been lacking. And I really do appreciate the idea of, like, anybody can show up to the Fairview meeting. It doesn't just have to be Fairview residents, but the Fairview people need, I think, an opportunity to express their feelings about the neighborhood that they know and love, particularly. They're there all the time. And we do, I think, want to encourage that to achieve even some of these goals. Like, I can imagine we've talked about having neighborhood-based, maybe composting eventually becomes more neighborhood-based, or neighborhood gardens, neighborhood things. So there is that you need to feel a part of your neighborhood before you're going to be asked to, to contribute, maybe. And so I just wanted to clarify that it's not about weighting those people necessarily more than others, but giving them an opportunity to talk about their own neighborhood and engage about their neighborhood.
And civic pride. I think you're like hearkening back to this idea of civic pride.
Yeah.
Yeah, I dig it.
Yeah.
I dig it.
Neighborhood identity is a big one.
Well, I think some of these goals or all of them are citywide.
Yeah.
It's how you achieve them in your neighborhood. I think what you're talking about, right? And that, how do we embrace that as a community? And if we, it's probably at the neighborhood level that someone's going to, build a, not a food garden or whatever, community garden, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's really how these things happen in community, and that's probably what I'm hearing is that's likely at the neighborhood level that some of these things would happen. We have the same goals across the city, but how we achieve those is, can be at a neighborhood level.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Yes, Natalie, and then
I was just going to add, many of these actions in here will also require more engagement. So, if we wanted to do a project, if we wanted to put in a bike route, if we wanted to put something in Fairview, then we would go back to those residents and say, hey, this is how we see this policy applying in your neighborhood, and they'd have an opportunity to comment. So it's the high level policy, and then there'll still be work to engage with our community at later stages.
thank you, Natalie. Councillor Page.
I love where the discussion is going. I think finding that balance between a sense of belonging, but also not a sense of control, that you can tell people what's not going to go in your backyard. I really think that's important, that you get a say, but it's just because it's, that the public value is put front and center because these serve beyond. As we were talking about the targets, and I was going through them, and I think there's a bit of alignment to go there. We had the urban forest report from this summer, and I think there's a better target there for tree canopy cover. Like, we've got 10% improvement above and beyond where we're at right now, and I think there was more of a X number of percent will be covered, and we might want to look at that goal too and tighten it up.
Okay. Councilor Tate?
Do you want to go?
Okay, you go.
I'm going to go commerce and industry. Do you want to stick in this zone?
No, mine is another
Okay.
area, so you go.
Awesome. Thank you for.
We're so polite. We're so Canadian.
Do you want to? No, you go. Thank you for outlining just more context around the commercial and industrial portions of the town, zoning and areas. I think that this is something that right now is not like the top of everybody's mind. We think a lot about housing. We think a lot about affordable housing. Right now in the community, we're thinking a lot about recreation. And then long term, this is a big deal. We also have to actually think about where are people going to work. So there's like the employment zones and such. And one thing that I have seen in small towns that we are not yet a victim of is the sprawl. And we don't really have the ability to sprawl yet, but then there is a danger always in a growing city to sprawl. And so I like that we haven't gone there at all, thinking, oh my gosh, we're going to need a bigger grocery store. We're going to have to go that way and build, a new huge superstore or whatever. And because that ends up building these other arterial lanes, and then you've got commercial in between because nobody wants to live on that big road, and it just turns into this big, long mess of strip malls in a lot of places. And we haven't done that, and I really appreciate that. I did notice in here that it talks about the fact that in order to get more employment spaces, we might have to repurpose some of the existing buildings, but also identify that the fact that there aren't many existing buildings. So I'm just curious from a 30-year perspective, how do we go about worrying about that? I'm curious. Help me understand, because the boundaries right now are here. So how do we plan for that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So one of the policies in this document is saying, if you want to consider boundary expansion, which maybe you don't, we do have a lot of land still within the city that you'd have to do a business case analysis. Does it make sense for the city to expand its boundaries? I also think it's smart use of our existing land. Employment lands typically like to be very spread out. They don't take up a lot of space. They're very inexpensive buildings to construct. But I think we would want to encourage our business community, our development community, those industrial lands to go more vertical. It is happening in some places, so it's a better use of land. I'd say we are limited in terms of our commercial land, so I think it's about using it really smartly and having flexible zoning and allowing repurposing of buildings. We did reach out to the chamber, and I think that communication's in there. They kind of realize we have the same problem, and I think they're thinking the same way. So what kind of land uses are compatible given our limited footprint, and some of those bigger buildings, those bigger footprint industries may locate outside the city or in other kind of cheaper places. It kind of calls in here, we don't want really heavy industrial land uses within the city, so those might be appropriate in other locations.
And we might start looking for things like you see in downtown Calgary, 2-story grocery stores, rather than saying, oh, we don't have enough space for the size of a grocery store that we now need to service our community. We're just going to build it just over there. And we're going to say, no, you have to go up, because that's going to be better for all of these neighborhoods and the nodes and such.
It is, yeah.
Interesting. Maybe an idea.
Could I just also add a bit to just following up on that chamber communication? One thing that they said too is that they're also looking at the fact that there's not much land and not many buildings, but Tom Thompson really emphasized that that housing is still the priority. Is that they're long term we're going to need more employment lands, but for now we don't have enough housing for the employment lands, sort of say that we already have. So because that's kind of, with our really sort of restricted boundaries, the obvious, or no-brainer would be like, oh, we'll find land somewhere else. So that means taking away from residential. And even looking at intensification of a commercial site as well. Okay, we could allow more height, but is that height going to be just for commercial or for residential in order to create that housing, workforce housing, or a bit of both? So it's pretty nuanced, but I thought it was really interesting to hear from the chamber that they're concerned about it, but they're more concerned about housing.
Great.
Thank you, Councillor Tate. Councillor Payne?
I want to jump into transportation, and one of the items on there was the airport, that we need to reevaluate if this is no longer cost effective to operate. When was the last time that was done?
We had talked about that.
I'm not aware of a time when that has been done. That's a carryover policy from the 2013 OCP.
Oh, so it hasn't been done for a while then.
Sorry. What was the question?
In the document that we have, it talks about that the airport is a land bank for us, and at some point we need to reevaluate if it's no longer cost effective to operate it as a private airfield, but to maintain the helicopter landing.
Yeah.
That was what I read. So I just was inquiring, have we evaluated at all to understand the cost effectiveness to operate it, considering the scarcity of land that we have for the clearly stated priority of housing?
Yeah, I think the way it's been looked at to date is really not so much the operation of the airport, but more, is there enough land to meet our housing targets? And this was, when that was added, the council of the day, agreed that, we're not going to commit this, long-term to an airport, but we're not, we'll leave it as an airport until, or at least until it's not needed for housing or other purposes. I think that's basically the philosophy at the time. So it wasn't, wasn't so much that, the airport cost a lot to run, and I think Chris will, as part of budget at some point, will speak to airport. I think right now it kind of covers its own costs, but it was really, the land bank idea was, use it as the airport. It's not costing the city any money. We don't, we have other lands to develop. When those develop out, then we'll consider whether there should be a change in use of the airport lands.
Okay, so we do have other lands to develop out, because sometimes I hear that we don't have other lands to develop out. So
hopefully
I
that's
agree.
clear.
I think there are other spaces, but I just want to make sure that we have everything on the radar. And we know that if it's been 2013, that land prices have increased a lot. I look at my assessment, and but that was, okay, I'm good with that. If
Yeah,
that's
I don't
okay,
think it was
can-
ever contemplated as a way to moderate land costs. That would be certainly when it came in, our land costs were not what they are today, but it was really never looked at as, if we made this land available, it would somehow moderate land costs. Doesn't mean you couldn't look at that in the future.
But I think the OCP, one of the things is to look at the land uses and make sure they're performing at their highest and best usages. So that was one thing. So, but I'm good with that. Thank you for the answer to the question. May I ask another?
Yeah.
I am interested in the 5-year reporting cycle. So it seems like a long time to me, and a report can sit somewhat dormant or not fully activated, and then all of a sudden you look at year 5 and you go, oh, we better get on it to meet our targets. I would love to see, and I do understand the constraints of staff time. This is not a make-work project. But it'd be great if we had like a dashboard of possibly not all of the targets, but 5 things. You know, we know in 5 years we wanted to get here in housing. Year 1, that's a number that to me is, you know, you have housing starts and those sorts of things might be easily populated. I think letting the community know that we have more parkland, more recreation land per capita than, and the vacancy rate, like just pick 5 things out of those targets that are most relevant to maybe each of those areas and say, hey, year 1, boom, we're on it. Target 2, oops, not quite, pull up our socks. I don't know, but I would like to see something a little more. And I think that also keeps people engaged in the process. If we want to get to net neutral by 2040, where are we? And are we telling people? Because if people want to contribute, I'm not sure they know 100% how to do that. So just a thought there. 5 years to me seems like a long time out.
This does overlap with council priorities in many ways. So we are, council does have a priority around climate. We have identified some metrics around that. So I think, how those two things tie together. Housing is a goal of council in your priorities, and we are reporting on that. And on your annual report, we have to report annually. So maybe we can just talk about how those two things mesh, and because I think we are reporting on a number of the high priorities, and we are going to get back together and talk about council's priorities. And now you have the OCP, you got some more feedback what the community really wants, and so maybe there's some fine tuning of those, and certainly we will report those annually as part of the we have to do that in the annual report.
Yeah, I just want to keep it simple, simple, easy, quick.
Councillor Page?
Yeah, mine will be quick. I'm noting we don't have the enforcement text in here. It's omitted in the draft, so I can't weigh in on that. But my thought was going to be... Yeah? You want to speak to it?
The enforcement, we left that as a placeholder for now. We're waiting back on the legal review of the OCP as well too from the lawyer. I'm thinking that it's not going to, actually pretty much no OCPs have that enforcement text anymore. I think it's redundant. I think that section is just going to disappear.
Okay.
But if it doesn't disappear, depending on that legal advice, it'll probably look very much the same thing as what's in the current 2013 OCP. But it's not an enforcement type of bylaw. It's a visionary bylaw. So no one else is doing that, and I think that's going to just go.
Okay.
Supplemental.
Okay.
If I may. Won't be a speech or anything. Thinking about how we continually improve this document as opposed to every 5 years doing a massive lift, and I think there's space, especially in the tenure cycles, for big lifts of whole documents. When we look at the objectives and break those down into sections, potentially a place we might speak to enforcement or continual renewal is making that commitment that every year or 18 months we're going to take a basket of these, as Councillor Payne has alluded to, refresh those areas, those objectives, and talk about them a little bit more, because it is my understanding, at least with OCPs, like continually refreshing the document resets your clock in terms of you've revisited it, you've updated it, and maybe you don't necessarily need to every 5 years do this process. If we're spending more time every year doing a segment of those objectives and going back to communities and how do you feel about the transportation stuff? How do you feel about parks and recreation? How do you feel about land use planning? And then following years we do different parts of the objectives, and we might just lay that out in enforcement or continual renewal, how we're going to keep this document relevant, fresh, but also not run people down with continual changes they can't keep track of.
Go ahead.
I was just going to add, so you're required to update the OCP every 5 years to integrate your housing needs report.
Yep.
I don't think you need to do a big holistic update of your OCP every 5 years. It would be a big process. It took us 2 years to update it. So hopefully, I'd say you'd probably want to stick with like a more holistic update every 10 years, and every 5 years maybe just make some tweaks and integrate the housing needs report data, or whatever council, if council wanted to do a big update, you could do that too.
And I think, consistency for neighborhoods, for, people trying to develop for many reasons. I think you'd want to be a little careful of how often you updated it, because you just, I think, start to confuse people. I thought, it was this and now it's this. So
you're thinking more, we do this process every 10 years and we incorporate the statistical information coming off the housing needs report into the existing model every 5, and then that gives consistency, but also refreshes.
unless something major changes in your community that you need to react to, and or you anticipate, or we're not getting anywhere close to meeting our housing targets or other goals, and you go, well, those policies
There's a
clearly
requirement from the feds to put a Trump statue somewhere.
yeah, exactly. Rename a mountain or a
Yeah.
golf or something like that.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah, I think.
Okay, thanks.
So everyone's had quite a few bats. But Councillor Lottenberg, you want one more here? So
I'll be quick.
okay.
I want to come back to the targets related to natural environment. It's one of the hard ones. I think I've said this over and over again, getting a municipal responsibility around that. But I think, as Councillor Page pointed out, the tree canopy covers, it doesn't actually necessarily reflect the natural environment. It's one of those hard ones. So I sent on a number of alternatives to council and staff to pick from that I think are more actually representative of the natural environment and in line with ecological values. So I'll just share that.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Lottenberg. All right. That was a wholesome hour and 45-minute discussion. So I want to. I'll just add, I guess, my 2 cents. Just that I thank you so much for this accumulation of 2 years of work, a lot of outreach, a lot of hours spent. It is, I think, really very fulsome document. It feels like it's, the weaving in of the Nelson Next piece is, I think, quite I wouldn't call it revolutionary, but it's really, I think it's a really important step for our city, considering we spent, I think, 2 years building the Nelson Next document with also a ton of community outreach, and now it's woven right into the OCP. And I mean, the Nelson Next document was also driven heavily by data and science, which I think previous documents were maybe a little more vague on that. This was like really hard science, and so now that's woven right into the OCP, which gives, I think, our city a really good foundation to work from. So thankful to staff for making that happen. And also I'm just thankful to the community for all the interaction and reporting. So thank you, Alex, for all your work in way there across the country in Montreal. Thank you very much. And I think if that is good, then we'll wrap this section of the meeting up. Thank you, Ken and Natalie, for your time. And yeah. Good stuff.
Yay.
Yeah. So with that.
Did you also thank the community members on the panel, the 12?
We're not done yet, so.
You're not done.
Yeah, we're not
You
quite
don't-
completed.
You're a counselor.
Are you talking about the OCP
Well, there's
committee?
another meeting.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think there's another,
There's still
We
more.
meet,
Yeah.
we meet again. We get to do this with the committee.
yes.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Our duties have not been wrapped up.
Yes. Okay, so number 13 is late items. No. And then number 14 is resolution to adjourn. So I need
We're recessing to go back.
Oh, we need to go
into-
back, right, okay. Sorry, thank you. So,
Sorry, you've got some on camera.
so I guess this is, we need to,
Thank the committee.
Get a resolution
resolution, okay. So I need a mover and a seconder of resolution to go into camera. So Councillor Page, Councillor Payne, all those in favor? Thank you. So 5-minute recess and then back into camera.
Yeah, that's good.